Jake Meyer, how's it going?
I'm not too bad. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really good, man. Thanks for coming on.
Not at all, not at all. I mean, it's crazy times we live in, but this is the way
Yes.
that we're all connecting, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Which is good, for a virtual podcast. It's nice. It's giving me the opportunity to really nail down some really awesome guests who would otherwise be busy, on the speaker circuit or actually being out and about. And so it's fortunate for me, but kind of a crazy time
Well,
for
I,
sure.
I, I imagine a lot of people said no before you eventually got to me. Is that low down on your list?
Well, I won't say who said no, but somebody who had climbed Everest as well.
Yeah,
I reached out at the same time, and they
yeah.
replied basically saying no.
What's
Let
the
me
fee? What's the fee?
let me know when your channel grows and stuff like that. And then you replied, I was like, yeah, but I've got someone that's climbed K2 as well, so it doesn't matter. I've got someone far better.
Exactly. Yeah, don't believe your own hype.
Yeah, exactly. Who's Jake Mayer? What have you been up to? What's your story?
Um, so I guess the story is, the brand is about climbing and mountaineering, and are really about just sort of setting myself some interesting challenges around the world to try and increase my altitude. When I was growing up, I was absolutely awful at ball sports. I'm completely malcoordinated. I can't catch, kick, or throw a ball to save my life. And I don't know about you, but I very much had this sort of sense that when I was at school, there seemed to be a very strong correlation between those who were good at sports and those who were considered cool.
Mm,
And I appreciate that correlation is not causation, but I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to be good at rugby, football, cricket. If I can find a sport that nobody else does, then by default, I will be the best in the school, and the coolness and the plaudits will follow.
mm.
I found climbing and I fell in love with it. The coolness definitely didn't follow, other than in a very literal sense
Yeah, yeah.
of just getting cold up mountains. But it just took me into this rather weird and wonderful and slightly illogical sport where the whole
Mm,
idea was just to get a little bit higher than I was a moment ago.
mm. And you clearly have a passion for it. You clearly enjoyed it. It wasn't just driven by wanting to be different or wanting to be cool. I imagine that feeling died off relatively quickly once you got into the sport. Is it sport? Is climbing a sport? Is that what you define it as?
I would, well, I would, so I've got two answers to this. So firstly, I would, for myself, it's a way of life.
Mm,
I am a climber, a mountaineer, whether or
mm,
not I'm on the side of a hill or I'm sitting here in my office talking to you and
mm,
the viewers today.
mm,
But actually, if you take Hemingway's definition, Hemingway spoke about there were only three sports, and they were bullfighting, mountaineering, and motor racing. Everything else is just a game. So
mm,
I quite like that. I haven't done any bullfighting or motor racing, but I'm
mm.
happy to sort of stay in my lane with the mountaineering.
So, I want to get into talking about Everest and talking about K2, but I want to, how does, we all have our different realities and our different experiences and
Mm.
stuff like that. How does something happen to a young lad, a 21-year-old lad in 2005, where he hits the top of Everest, he summits Everest? What happens in someone's life leading up to that point to
Yeah.
put everything in place? Because, it's an incredible feat. Many people die doing it. And you're 21. It's an extremely expensive endeavor, or maybe you can correct me. What needs to be put into place for a young lad at 21 who, by that time I don't know, still trying to get girls and drinking as many vodka Red Bulls as I could. That was the pinnacle of my achievements at that age.
Yeah.
How does that come about?
I mean, I think like everything in life, there isn't really such a thing as overnight success. I guess short of your 5 minutes of fame on Love Island or Big Brother, probably back in the days.
Mm.
But it had been quite a journey to get to Everest, and actually Everest was the end of what I almost refer to as the first chapter in my
Wow.
mountaineering book and life. And when I was about 14, I'd read a magazine article about a young British climber called Sandeep Dillon. Now, he was a captain in the British Army, and he'd just become the youngest person in the world to complete a challenge called the Seven Summits. He was 28 years old, and the Seven Summits is the quest for the highest point on every continent. And I remember reading this and thinking to myself, this is really cool. He's undertaken this challenge that takes you all over the world to do some really interesting mountains. I didn't know that much about the mountains. I'd been rock climbing. I'd done a little bit of hill walking by that point. So I certainly identified as a climber, but nothing of this kind of scale. And I thought to myself, well, if he's 28 and he's done it, well, I'm 14. Why can't I do it? 28, old man, completely past it. And so this youthful and naive sense of invincibility, and I set my sights on it. And I was fortunate enough to go off to Kilimanjaro when I was 15, and I actually watched the sunrise on the 1st of January 2000 from the top of Kili, which was amazing. And it was a great start to my 7 Summits aspirations, and was also the most incredible New Year's resolution, from this point onwards and upwards. And of course, not just New Year's, but new millennial resolution. And of course, Kilimanjaro is not a technically difficult mountain to climb, but it's tough. It's hard work. It has a pretty high failure rate of people trying to climb it too quickly because it's high. And I did that with my father, and it was just fabulous. And that I got the bug from that, about having that adventure. And so whilst I'd started doing the more technical rock climbing, actually, I really fell in love with the sort of the holistic sense of adventure that an expedition delivers. The going to a different country, it's integrating yourself into the culture, or the veneer of the culture that you do when you go there. It's about experiencing different things. It's about meeting people from all over the world often, and it's about setting your sights on a goal which you may or may not succeed, but as long as you come home safely, that doesn't matter. So it's sort of setting off with lofty ambitions. And if the definition of adventure is a journey with an uncertain destination, then that's a definition of life, isn't it? None of us know quite where we're going to end up. We might have plans and ideas and thoughts and dreams, but these days we don't quite know necessarily what's going to happen tomorrow.
For a lot of people who fail, who have a dream and don't quite get it, doubt has a lot to do with that. Throughout your biggest climbs, and your smallest climbs as well, were you ever in doubt? Did things ever sort of come in your mind, like, I can't do this? Or were you just laser focused at all times?
So I think almost something like a happy medium in between. So I'm not one of those, strangely speaking, I'm not a hugely ambitious person. I know that I'm sort of contradicting all the things that I've done and want to do, but I'm not one of those people that is approaching things with absolutes of, targets in my mind, and I'm going to do it like this, and watch out anybody who gets in my way. I'm slightly more sort of happy-go-lucky and want to have an amazing experience. And I think that we can also do that. And yes, there have been times where I've thought, ooh, this is a bit cheeky, this is a bit interesting, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. And there have been plenty of times in expeditions where I haven't achieved what I've set out for. But the way I like to look at it is that whilst the summit may be a target, the ultimate goal is about coming home safely. And therefore, yes, you set off with the view of standing on top of a mountain, but ultimately everything that you do, every risk that you assess, every decision you make has to be building towards the coming home safely. And therefore, if the two things contradict each other, you want to make sure you do the safe thing. And and there have been all sorts of times throughout my career on various mountains where I have looked at something and gone, maybe this is not the moment, maybe this is not the time, but the mountain's not going anywhere and I can always come back.
Exactly. And I think not everybody has that mindset, and they end up getting stuck, dying of exposure. And I kind of understand that too. I think a lot of these climbers have this unhealthy obsession. They weren't so happy-go-lucky like you. They weren't sort of taking it in their stride and treating it just like an experience. They really allowed that to push the boundaries of what they were capable of doing, which is admirable in a sense, but of course, in terms of longevity, it's a horrible mindset. And I guess that's why you're still here, and you allowed to take the failures you had at K2, and you didn't let it kind of stifle your motivation, and you didn't let it get you down. I imagine it fed the beast more, and having that happy-go-lucky kind of attitude towards achieving things, and just being hungry for experiences instead of achievements, that ultimately led you to achieving some crazy stuff at a very, very young age. And I think a lot of people can learn a lot from that. I've been saying for a long time, if people can focus on enjoying the journey, enjoying the process, and trying to achieve things, they'll live in the moment a lot more. And it sounds like to me, your mindset is quite a lot of living in the moment, being in the present moment, and just enjoying the process leading up to whatever you were trying to achieve. And then the achievement and the goals that you hit just become a byproduct. It becomes a result of just being this guy who is just focused on loving what he does and creating experiences for himself. And a lot of people could learn from that. And it's something that I'm kind of starting to adopt for myself, instead of worrying about the results and worrying about whether I win or lose or fail or succeed. If I just enjoy the process, good things happen. And I imagine you can kind of attest to that mindset as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Experience is a tough teacher, because she gives the test first and the lesson afterwards. And so, just having this sense of we're going to go and give it a go. Yes, of course, we want us to succeed. We want to do well. We want to get the job. We want to pass the exam. We want to climb to the top of the mountain, whatever it is that you're trying to do. But if that doesn't happen, then don't look back on it going, oh, it was a complete waste of time, crushing defeat. Yes, of course, it may be disappointing depending on the scale or whatever it meant. But ultimately look back and reflect and go, okay, so what? So what have I learned from it? And treating every failure, in inverted commas, as just another learning experience. And I'll never forget, actually, my second big trip was a trip down to South America, to Aconcagua, which is the highest mountain in South America. It's also the highest mountain outside of the Himalayas in the southern and the western hemispheres. It's just under 7,000 meters high, 23,000 feet. So it's a big old hill. And I went down there when I was 16. So it was the year after Kilimanjaro, and I was buoyed up by this achievement on Kilimanjaro about, I've done it, I set off and I got to the top, hooray, I'm invincible. And I had that mindset stepping onto Aconcagua, thinking that surely the difficult bit is the fundraising and the getting there. Once I'm there, it's just putting one foot in front of the other, and we'll get to the top, and then we'll come home, and that's two of the summits ticked. And long story short, but on the summit day, we got up to the high camp at about 6,000 meters, and hadn't had a great night, and the altitude was really affecting me, and I'd been quite sick, and essentially I got altitude sickness. And collectively, but I wasn't going to go anywhere anyway, but collectively the decision was made, Jake, you are certainly not going up. You stay and rest, and ideally start heading back down. And the rest of the team continued. And in the end, actually, the rest of the team, they got the bad weather forced them back. But none of us got to the top. And I remember coming back from that being bitterly disappointed and really thinking I'd failed, to the point of going, here I was, I'd put all of my, I'd gone to Vegas, I'd staked all of my money on red, on the blackjack table, about wanting to be a climber and about I can do this. And it hadn't come up. And therefore, have I made a massive wrong decision in the direction of my life? Maybe I can't do this. And therefore, do I completely reevaluate the direction I want to take? And do I want to do this climbing? And maybe I shouldn't be thinking about the 7 summits. And I remember really clearly my climbing instructor, an incredibly empathetic, inspirational guy called Rupert Rosedale. And he was my mentor, and he was there on the trip with me, and him saying to me, Jake, how are you feeling? And I sort of said how disappointed I was. He said, don't worry about it. You have been successful. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you're coming home and you've had an amazing experience. It's the summit is just an arbitrary piece of rock that's higher than any other bit of arbitrary piece of rock. Don't worry about it. And it completely sort of reset my mindset in terms of failure and what that means. And in some ways, having that experience that early on in my climbing career was probably the best thing that could ever happen to me, because it taught me that, when you, we're taught this when we're young, you fall off the bicycle, you get back on, don't you?
Exactly.
I think when we're older, we lose that sense of willingness to allow ourselves to fail and then want to have another go. I think we go, well, I've tried it. It didn't work. I obviously can't do that. I've now got a fixed mindset. I'll go and do something else.
So 21 years old, your big time comes to climb Everest. Now, Everest kind of feels like a fairy tale for a lot of people. And it's an exciting subject to explore. There are plenty of documentaries out there. There are plenty of movies and films and books and fictional stuff and non-fictional stuff. And what's it like climbing Everest? I know it's a very broad question. Did you also do the walk to base camp, or did you did you transport yourself to base camp?
So, but a little bit of background here. So I climbed Everest from the north side, so from the Tibetan Chinese side of the mountain. And so to get to base camp on that side of the mountain, you can actually drive into base camp. So it's a lot easier. So I was transported to base camp. It's not quite like sort of the classic Everest base camp trek that people who've done it, that's where they tend to go. And they walk up through the villages in the Khumbu Valley, and it's an incredible experience in Nepal. And then you get to base camp and you climb up to Kalapatal and you see the summit and you watch the sunrise come in. So slightly different. Now, having said that, base camp on the north side of the mountain is still about 20 miles away from the foot of the mountain. So you've got a fair old yomp to then get onto the mountain. But it's a slightly more technical climb. It's much more rocky on the north side. You don't have the challenges and the dangers of the ice fall. So when you see those pictures of people crossing the ladders, those huge things, really exciting and really sort of visual and cool. But we don't have any of that. And to be perfectly honest, anyone who's been through the Khumbu Valley, they see it and they go, it's beautiful, but to be honest, it's a bit of a ball ache and it's dangerous and it's a bit scary and it's constantly changing. And if it could be a nice flat section going up to it, it'd be a lot easier.
Imagine it creates bottlenecks as well, right?
Oh, huge bottlenecks, exactly. And especially because many more people do try and climb it from the south side. So you have, people trying to cross these little sections, which might be sort of, 10, 15 feet across, which of course, if you're just walking 10 or 15 feet, you do that in a few seconds, but it's taking you 3 or 4 minutes perhaps to clip in and to gently make your way across. And of course, if someone falls or gets scared or something, then it slows the whole thing down. So it does cause challenges. And there's a sort of a separate question, which of course we can, or element that we can cover, talking about the amount of people on Everest and things, and the queues and the traffic jams and what's it all about. But the experience of climbing it is just epic. And in some ways, I attribute it similar to my experience of going on an operational tour with the army to Afghanistan, in that, you're away for a long period of time from the people that you know and the people you love. You're there to do something quite specific. You hopefully believe in what you're doing. You're there with a team. Hopefully you get on really well with that team, but ultimately you haven't got much choice. You've got a job to do, so you've got to get on. You've got a hell of a lot of boredom and sitting around, and you've got some quite tedious, monotonous bits and pieces that you've got to do. It's hard work. It's physically tough. You're in uncomfortable living environment, and then there are some moments of sheer terror and moments of sheer delight as well. And so you have this incredible myriad of experiences all wrapped up into, my trip to Everest or my tour of Afghanistan or whatever it is. It's very easy to pass off as just one thing. And it is an epic pick and mix bag of experiences. And
of course, mixed emotions, which, sometimes they'll drive you and sometimes they'll dishearten you. How much... You set off, you've climatized at base camp. I mean, I imagine you spent a few weeks there. Is that right? 3 weeks?
Yeah, you probably spent about a week or so at base camp before you then sort of start, maybe 5 days before you then start looking to push further up the mountain. And so from base camp at 5,200 meters, we then took us 2 days to climb up to advanced base camp, which is at 6,400 meters, so about a 1,200 meter height gain. You get there, you feel absolutely awful. You feel really shitty. It's like the best analogy is like the worst hangover you've ever had.
Really?
It's proper sort of curl up into a ball. Your head is pounding. You're exhausted, but you can't sleep. You're starving, but you can't really hold anything down. You're possibly being sick as well, but you haven't necessarily had the fun of the night before that at least allows you to go, cause and effect reasoning. There's a famous British climber from sort of the 60s and 70s called Don Willans, and he was a hard man. He was asked, what's it like to go, how do you prepare for high altitude climbing? He said, go out and get motherlessly drunk every single night. And I guess it worked for him. So you have this, you go up there, you feel awful, you then come back down base camp. This 20 odd miles, 1,200 meter descent. And so this weird thing when you're climbing of you climb up and you're thinking, this is hard work. And then that you're going to have to come back down again and then climb back up again and then back down again. And sort of this fartlek sort of jack in the box shuttle run up and down, up and down, up and down. But you appreciate that's just part and parcel of the experience.
And that's part of the climatization process. And what's really happening there? Are you just sort of preparing your body for the difference in oxygen and the different levels of air and stuff like that?
Yeah. Now I'm going to massively oversimplify it here, and of course, if we've got anyone who knows about this, they're immediately going to be like, no, that's not it. But as you go higher up into the atmosphere and climb any mountain, the atmospheric pressure drops. There is, in theory, well, in practice, less available oxygen for you to breathe. And on the summit of Everest, it's about a third to a quarter of the air pressure that there is at sea level. So therefore, for every breath you take in, you're only getting about a third or a quarter of the oxygen you're taking. Now, there's a lot of other stuff going on as well. And so when you're acclimatizing, you're sort of in simplest terms, your body is creating more red blood cells to sort of create more efficient use of the transportation of the oxygen to the blood. If we think back to our biology, when you 20% of the air is oxygen, but actually you only use a small percentage of that when you actually breathe it in. So the body is remarkably adaptable and can change, but it is just building up that tolerance to the changing environment. So it's not the pressure itself; it's the getting used to the lack of oxygen that sort of comes alongside it.
So obviously there comes a time when you're leaving for advanced base camp, but this time you're not coming straight back. And I imagine that's when it becomes super real, because at that point you're probably just focused on climatizing and getting up and back and up and back and going through the process of preparations. When climbing the North Face, are you missing tons of the same obstacles like the Hillary Step and a couple of bits? So it's a completely different experience and I don't think the North Face has really been documented as much, of course, as the South Face. So, I mean, I know nothing about it.
We're on the North Ridge, and so Everest has two main routes. So you've got the sort of the South Coombe, which is sort of the classic route. So that was the Hillary and Tenzing, and probably about 2/3 of people since then have climbed it via that route. So that's the Nepalese side from the south, and then on the north, again, the vast majority of people who do it from the north climb the North Ridge. So you're not actually on the face itself until you're sort of right near the top. Having said that, I think there are something like 14 different routes on Everest. Wow. Again, somebody will correct me on that, but it's something like that. So there are loads of variations of it. There's the West Ridge, there's the Kanshing Face, there's some really extreme stuff, but the vast majority, something like 95+% of people do it via these two main routes, and roughly speaking, 2/3 on the south and 1/3 on the north. And so when you set off, and it's the same for any big mountain, you set off on your summit push, and on some mountains that's just a day. You're leaving from the high camp, and that's it. On a big expedition, so Himalayan style expedition, that's often counted from the time at which you leave base camp or your main camp, and you know that you're going to keep going up until either you hit the top or something happens that causes you to come back down. This is it, and it's probably your only chance. So this is your summit push. And the analogy that I like to use is I call it Schrodinger's lottery ticket. So are you familiar with Schrodinger's cat?
Schrodinger's cat and stuff.
Exactly. So this idea that you could have something which exists in two states, and of course, until you look at it, you don't know what state it is at. So this is like the lucky dip lottery ticket. Okay, you've gone down the local Londis, you've bought this lucky dip lottery ticket, you don't know what the numbers are, you put it in your pocket, and the draw has been, okay, the Euro Millions draw has been, okay, and until you check those lottery numbers, you potentially in your pocket have both the winning, in your own mind at least, both the winning ticket and the losing ticket. Now, nobody buys a lottery ticket because if they match two numbers, they might get another free spin. Okay, we all buy it because we're seduced by the 10 million or the 50 million, the Grand Slam. And that's a bit like climbing a big mountain. Nobody goes to climb a big mountain thinking, well, maybe I'll get to Camp 1. Okay, we all go because we want the jackpot. We want to go for the summit. But of course, until you start taking that lottery ticket out and sort of checking off those numbers, you don't know quite, what's actually happening. And it's a bit like when you leave base camp, and it's almost like every single step you take towards the summit, when things are going fine, is brilliant. You keep on going. But at any point in a split second, everything can change. So that could be an accident, it could be an instant, it could be something a little bit slower, like the change in the weather system that means that you thought it was going to be good tomorrow, but actually it's not good anymore, and that's ruined your chances. It could be a rockfall and avalanche. And so it's a bit like sort of slowly uncovering each number one by one and going, oh, I've got that number, brilliant. Oh, I've got the next number, brilliant. And then going, oh, I haven't got that number, rip it up, I haven't got the jackpot. And I think that when you set off for a summit on any mountain, you need to set off with again, coming back to this idea of the target is the summit, but the goal is coming back home safely. And therefore, every single step I take is a legitimate turnaround point. And every point between here and the top is a legitimate turnaround point. Now, the summit, of course, is the ultimate arbitrary turnaround point, and we hope we'll get there. But if something changes, no matter how far I get, that's cool. And
of course, your mindset is you're just grateful for the experience regardless. And of course, you want to hit the summit. You want that tweet, you want that Facebook post, you want to be able to tell everybody you did it. But also that doesn't outweigh just the gratitude you have for the experience. And that's a loving outlook. It's a loving energy towards doing something dangerous as fuck and hard. And I guess that mindset makes it actually more achievable and easier. I remember when you were on one of the breakfast shows, and I love how they were trying to tell you how you felt about it, but it was like fucking typical mainstream media, holy shit. And but when you were just like, it's just another walk on the hill, and they were like, well, it's not though, is it? But to you, it has to be. That's such a key to success. There is this blissful ignorance attitude, which to some it's arrogance, but to those who behold it, it's a path to success an awful lot of the time. Taking things in your stride, that happy-go-lucky attitude that you had is pivotal to achieving extreme feats of challenge that normal people don't have the mindset to do. And in order to do that, you have to be different. You have to be different to the average person. And maybe that's what that key difference is to achieving things like this.
And I think, and actually just quickly picking up one of the points there about this another day on the hill, and that was something that I learned actually slightly later on in my climbing career. And it was another amazing inspirational climbing partner of mine, a lady called Diane Gilbert, Scottish climber who I climbed Everest with, and I did a trip to K2 with. Now K2, of course, is fearsome, has a fearsome reputation. 1 in 4 people die, and all of those kind of slightly misquoted statistics that go with it, and so many books and films about it, and so you create in your own mind this behemoth, this ghoul, this monster, this savage mountain. It's known as the savage mountain before you even get there, and therefore it carries so much more sort of emotional and mental baggage. And I remember Diane saying when we went off to K2, and I was sort of saying, oh yes, and then in 1933, this expedition tried to do it, and she went, I haven't really read anything about it. I haven't read any books about it. And I go, oh, why not? And she said, well, it doesn't really matter what the mountain's called or where the mountain is, because when I'm on the side of it, it's just another hill. And a day on the hill is a day on the hill. It doesn't matter whether or not you're in Scotland, you're in, on Mount Snowdon, you're on K2, yes, of course, the circumstances might be different, but as long as you look after yourself and those around you, it's just a day on the hill. And I think that kind of attitude is really important. Every single day we can be anxious about this, what's happening tomorrow, and about this meeting, this presentation, this whatever, and then just saying it's just another day of work, or it's just another day of whatever it is. Now that doesn't make it any less of a challenge tomorrow, but try not to let it be more in your head than it is.
Otherwise it will control you, and that's the issue. That's how people push beyond the limits of their capability and ultimately don't come back. And a lot of people will say, well, saying it's another day on the hill is disrespectful to those who lost their lives. But, if they had the mindset of it's another day on the hill, they would have come home safely and tried again another time. Back to Everest, before we get to K2, back to Everest, what was the most challenging? Were there any parts of the climb where you were like, this is hard, any tense moments? What were the kind of, with a journey like this, there will be some very standout points, I imagine, in your memory of traumatic experiences and rewarding experiences. Of course, the latter would be really summiting and hitting the top. What were the tense moments?
So there were two sort of main moments which I remember very, very keenly and really have stuck with me. Not just because of what they represented, but also what I learned from them as well. The first one was again on our summit push, climbing from Camp 3, 7,000 meters up towards Camp 4, and we were now starting to get to the point where we were higher than we'd ever been before. So this is not only was it higher on Everest, but it was personal altitude record for me. And this was it again, almost looking at the lottery tickets, as lottery numbers as we're going on, and you're climbing higher and higher. And it wasn't particularly difficult climbing. It was a sort of a long, steep snow shoulder that takes you up to the northeast ridge towards the main ridge line. And we hadn't started using oxygen yet. And we were quite a small team, so we didn't have loads of oxygen. So we'd set ourselves, we're not going to start using oxygen until 7,500 meters. Many people have started using it much earlier on because they had much more of a sort of logistical supply chain to be able to supply them with the amount of oxygen and the bottles and everything they would need to support them in doing that. And to start with, we were feeling quite strong. We sort of set off like a sort of greyhound out of the traps from Camp 3, overtaking some people who were using oxygen. Thinking, yeah, come on, we're doing it. And of course, as you get high, you start to slow down. It's exhausting and it's tiring. And getting to the point where you sort of collapse down in the snow, so trying to get your breath back. And you look up sort of ahead of you, and the summit is more than a vertical mile away. More than a vertical, so it's 5,000 feet.
Wow.
I'm thinking, right, well, I'm not going to get there sitting on my arse. So come on. No summit has ever been climbed by somebody sitting on their arse. So right, come on, pick yourself up. Let's keep going. And you're getting to the point where almost every single step you take, you just want to collapse back down in the snow. Every step you take, your legs are burning from the lactic acid buildup. Your lungs are screaming, trying to draw in what little oxygen there is in the air, and your heart is pounding so hard you think it's about to burst out of your chest. You think you're about to do a John Hurt, and all the while, a little voice in the back of your head is going, "Jake, what on earth are you doing to yourself?" The internal monologue. Are you completely mad? I like to call that my conscience is
of course,
it's the cricket from Pinocchio. And thinking, this I can't do this. I can hardly go up 1 foot here without wanting to sit down. How am I going to do another 5,000 feet? And it's only going to get surely exponentially harder. This is really so cliche and a bit cheesy, but I ended up having to think, okay, actually, let's not worry about the summit. Let's not worry about Camp 6 or Camp 5 or anything else. All I'm going to focus on right here and right now is that twist in the road, that little patch of snow, that rock, whatever it is, 10 feet in front of me. And I'm going to get to that point. When I get there, I'm going to ask myself again, keep going or go back down. And the cheesy cliche, of course, is by taking a seemingly impossible challenge and breaking it down to lots more much manageable chunks. Impossible.
Well, it's also living, as we mentioned, in the present moment, and that's what allowed you to, maybe you enjoyed the process, but it allowed you to focus on the process, and you let go of the goal, and you let go of the big egoic reward at the end, and you just focused on just where you were at that given point, and there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and I think it's I think a lot of what we see and we read, and again, coming back to those memes that you were talking about at the beginning, we see those inspirational quotes, about have big dreams, and my goodness, I absolutely put my hand up in the past of set your sights as high as possible.
Yeah, of course.
Those kind of things. But actually, you've got to temper that with don't lose sight of what's right at your feet. It's all very well having those big lofty dreams, when I'm, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm whatever age, or I want to achieve this, or I want to do that, or I want to get this job, or I want to travel to that place. But actually, if we don't make it to tomorrow, or what we're doing doesn't contribute towards it, a dream without a plan is just a wish. And we've got to work out what that plan is, and how we put it, and not just working it out, but then enacting that plan in order to achieve that lofty dream.
How does news travel on Everest? Is it just like this huge game of Chinese whispers as you pass people coming down and up, or their radios? Are you all pretty connected, or is it just by chance from passing, finding out what's happening on the mountain?
Yeah, so a lot has changed over the years, and everything from the now abundance and the cost of satcoms and things like that has made a huge difference. You do get a lot of mountain gossip, and I still think that creating a new soap opera set in a base camp would make Coronation Street or EastEnders look tame. With all, again, the stories that you hear happening, the fights, who's really? All of that good stuff. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Some hilarious stuff, some tragic stuff. Just the general. And I guess you have such a melting pot of different people. Yes, in theory, all with the same dream, but of different cultures, all within a relatively small space in a very intense environment. And so human nature will out, and it is hilarious and epic and tragic and awful all at the same time. But yeah, on the mountain itself, you know, you sit down, you chat to people as they're passing and things. And you know, I definitely do see a huge benefit in always mountaineering networking. You know, whenever you arrive in base camp, go around and drink more tea. Drink lots, you know, go and spend time with other teams, create that network, those connections with other people, you know, not just from the point of getting news, but also you never know who you may need help from, or you may need to partner with, you know, going forwards. You know, these days, actually, from news point of view, you know, you've also got the satcoms, you know, so I had a device on me, which was a tracker, which meant that people at home were watching live as I was going to the summit of something like K2, which was, I guess, exciting, but also very scary, you know, when the tracker stops moving.
Yeah.
If I were to drop the tracker and it flies down the hill, what's happened to Jake? Has he fallen off? And people can text me on that. And so, you know, there I am, climbing a mountain, and I get a text going, oh yeah, we need to get somebody in to, you know, clean the windows at home or something like that. You know, a really mundane, brings you back down to sea level. A really mundane thing. And, you know, but it's just that sense of, as I say, making those connections. You know, even in theory, if you are solo or if you're a very small team, don't be an island. You know, don't try and do it by yourself. Even just having those connections and that communication with other teams, you never know how it will pay off. Even just for morale.
Of course, community is so important, and in an increasing world that we're living in, of this technology and this kind of maverick type attitude a lot of people are developing, we're becoming more divided and more separate as the years go on. As we evolve technologically, we're becoming less community focused and less group orientated. And there's a lot of value in drawing energy from other people and other people's experiences and other people's knowledge and information. And I imagine when trying to achieve something as crazy as climbing the world's most dangerous and tallest mountains, that's so valuable to have, just learning new things along the way, creating connections and friends that, you know, that could be the difference in getting an extra bottle of O, you know, or having someone just sit with you for 5 minutes and encourage you and give you those final words of encouragement that you need to actually get off your ass. Talk to me about, is it the dead zone? Essentially, there's a point. The death zone. It doesn't sound very pleasant, I will be honest. At what point do you know you're there? Because of course you've never climbed. You never climbed this mountain before. Do you know once you're there, or is it just like driving, you know, to Hackney Wick, where you're like, are we looking out for signs? Are we here yet? How do you know you're there? And once you're there, how does everything change for you?
Yeah. So for listeners and viewers, so the death zone is it's a relatively arbitrary height, which is, you know, normally given at 8,000 meters. You know, I think you could argue that perhaps it's about 7,500 meters. It's somewhere around that. So we're looking at, there aren't many mountains in the world that would offer this environment. You know, there are only 14 mountains which are above 8,000 meters. And by the time you take it down to 7,500 meters, you might be talking about sort of, you know, 100 or so. So there aren't that many. But it's basically the point at which the human body cannot acclimatize anymore. So you're living on borrowed time. So of course you can, and people have climbed Everest and all the other 8,000 meter mountains without oxygen. It is possible. It's humanly possible. It was first done in 1978 by two climbers, Reinhold Messner and Peter Habler. And then in a few years later, Messner went back and climbed Everest without oxygen, solo, by a new route as well. So he thought, I'm going to make that even better. When they did it in 1978, even the Sherpas who were with them, the apocryphal story is when they got back down, they were sort of patting them down, trying to find where they had their sort of secret James Bond breathing apparatus. They didn't believe it was possible. They didn't, you know, Sherpas considered themselves, you know, we are the ones who you know, have adapted, who are suited to this environment. If we can't do it, surely nobody else can do it. But it has been proved. But we're talking a very small percentage of people. So there's no signpost when you get there. And one could say that in some ways the death zone is actually a personal height, because for different people, you might in theory enter it at different stages, depending on how well you acclimatize. You know, a few, this is me thinking off the top here. I haven't given it any other thought other than this. I mean, a few years ago, 2 years ago, Ben Fogle and Victoria Pendleton so famously tried to climb Everest, and Ben made it to the top, and it was amazing. And Victoria, you know, had this incredible sort of valiant effort, but got really struck down by bad altitude sickness, and just sort of felt as though she'd hit the wall. And as you know, as a professional athlete, you know, she knows what she's talking about in that. You know, so one could almost argue was her equivalent to the death zone, so slightly lower. And when you get there, you realize that you are on borrowed time, that either you want to be on O's or you want to get up and down very quickly, or you're not going to keep going up. Yeah.
When did you know that you know, at some point, you know, there's going to be a last push to hit the summit? And when you realize that it's time to leave, they call it, there's like a window, isn't there? There's a window of weather, a weather window, where you get off your ass again and you get to make a push for the summit. When you find out it's time to go, how long is the climb? How many hours is it actually? Because it's sometimes, you know, when you watch these documentaries and this movie, it sounds like, oh, there's a window to go, and it's like you just pop into the shops and you're there. How realistically, how long's the climb from when you realize?
I say, well, the answer to any question is it depends. But the final climb, again, I would often define it as that's a summit push. So sometimes that could be 5, 6, 7 days, especially on a big mountain. You know, that's the point at which you're leaving your either base camp or advanced base camp. And you know, as I said earlier, you're heading up, and you'll keep on going until either you reach the top or something significant happens which causes you to have to turn around, you know, your arbitrary turnaround point, and entirely legitimate turnaround points. So on Everest, that was, so from advanced base camp, we probably had about 2 or 3 days warning that the weather was looking pretty good. You know, you're constantly mapping and watching. And of course, what has changed from, you know, 1996, Into Thin Air and the Everest movie, is the quality of the weather reporting, the distance at which you can look out at what is going on in the area. You know, we're not trying to do our own weather analysis. We're getting it all in from Switzerland, from Norway, from people who specialize in this. And often you're comparing the different reports and trying to sort of work out what you think is going to work best. So we had a few days to get yourself so psyched up, and this is going to be it. And sometimes that moves slightly. You know, you might get to the eve of it, and then you wake up and overnight the weather's just closed in, and you say, right, wait 24 hours, delay by 24 hours. And then you set off, and off you go for how many days it is. When you're getting for the final push, you know, so this is top camp on a mountain, you know, camp 4, 5, 6, whatever it might be, to the top. That's always exciting. That's almost your eve of battle. This is soldiers huddled around the campfire, you know, before Agincourt. You know, this is nobody quite knows what tomorrow is going to hold.
And I guess you're all trying to figure out who's made it, who hasn't, who's here.
Yeah, where are we? What are we going to do? You know, who's ready to go for it? Because just because you got to the top camp doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to keep on going. You know, you're listening to the other tents and the hacking coughs and the people sort of gasping for air and the, you know, or the people laughing and whatever, as everyone is sort of, you know, just preparing themselves and getting themselves ready. And you know, often on the summit push on a big mountain, you are setting off at maybe 10 o'clock at night. So therefore, you're probably having to get up at 8:30, 9 o'clock, something like that, to sort of sort yourself out, get dressed, have something to eat, something to drink before you go. So yeah, everything is so slowed down up there, you know, that nothing's ever done particularly quickly. So you've spent the day resting and sleeping, but of course it's difficult to sleep up there. It's pretty uncomfortable. And normally the best bit of sleep is about the hour or so before you then need to get up. You know?
Of course. That's always the way.
I've got to get up early. You know, it's like the alarm's going to go off at 5 a.m. You know, I can't sleep because I've got to get up early. And then, you know, that last 30 minutes is, but you know, the adrenaline is pumping, this sort of the apprehension, the excitement, the nervousness, the anxiety, all of this myriad of emotions. You know, sometimes you might feel very familiar with what's about to happen. Other times you might feel, I have no idea what's going to happen. And then, you know, the time comes at which you put the crampons on, you step out, and in some ways that final push is is a bit like being an astronaut. And I say it's almost the closest you can be to being an astronaut with still having your feet on terra firma, because you're leaving the safety of the command module. You're going on your spacewalk. The sort of the unzipping of the tents. Almost you've got the airlock of the inner tent and the outer tent as you put your kit on, and then you're out into the inky darkness. And hopefully it's a clear night so you can see the stars. You are sort of fully covered in your astronaut suit, your Teletubby suit. You've got your oven mitts on your hands, which is manipulating the equipment quite difficult, but of course keeping your fingers and toes, or keeping your fingers nice and warm. You've got your breathing apparatus on, your full face balaclava, your goggles, your mask, no exposed flesh. Often when you get onto a ridge line, it's people often talk about sort of seeing the curvature of the earth from the top of Everest. I can't remember it specifically, and I think sometimes in the photos it might be a trick of the lens.
Oh, don't. We had Mark Sargent on the podcast, the godfather of the flat earth movement, and he gave me the whole, the world's flat even from Everest. You can't see a curvature of the earth. But then again, I don't think you actually should be able to. The earth's so bloody big, even 30,000 feet up, the curvature wouldn't be that prominent, right?
I think so. I mean, let's keep going with I think it was really obvious. The whole world just sloped off around me. But it almost feels like you have more than 180 degrees of sky. Now it might be that you've only got 181 degrees of sky, but it feels like and you might have found it. There are certain places in the UK you can go. I mean, as an army person, for me, Salisbury Plain, for instance, where when you're there at night, there is so much sky. The sky just looks big. There's no light pollution, and there's just so much of it. And up there's even more of it. So you sometimes feel as though there are stars that are below you.
Wow.
And all you can, in space, no one can hear you scream. On Everest, no one can hear you. I'm sure there's an analogy that comes in there as well. But all you can hear is sort of the crunching of your boots on the snow, or the scraping of crampons on the rock, and your laboured gasp. But other than that, that's about it. Maybe a very slight sort of whistling of the wind, but that's about it. So there's sort of, it's just rather magical. And whilst there are other people around, you're still sort of slightly lost in your own world.
Yeah. What I find fascinating of watching the videos of people summiting is they are absolutely spent. I mean, you have nothing left up till the point you realize these guys are going to make the summit. Then all of a sudden they're just excited. They're jumping around. They have all of the energy in the world, as if it looked easy. You see some of these summit videos, people jumping around, high-fiving, as if they've just, got out of bed. And what was the feeling when you realize, you're a few meters away, 50, 100 meters away, you're going to do it? Was there this huge draw of energy that sort of came out from nowhere, where the excitement just took over and you were just full of energy?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely sort of like an emotional draw of energy that comes into you, and I get quite emotional on summits. I'm a bit of a blubber. Goodness, it takes a sort of a good rom-com, and I'm starting to get a bit of a lump in my throat. So I'm very manly. I'm very manly, and brave, and courageous, and heroic. But yeah, there is this moment, and it doesn't necessarily give you any extra power, and I think, going back to your point, there's a very sort of legitimate explanation of that, in that when you are walking, and especially if you're climbing, that is hard work at this altitude. Even with oxygen on, it is hard work. So you are sluggish in your movement, you are slow, and so that when you see people and they're literally arriving on the summit, they're trudging in, and they get there and their sort of arms are down by their sides, and they sort of almost look around like these weird astronauts, and somebody else who's been there for a few minutes is like, "Well, well done, you've done it," and come and give me a hug, and this person is like, just falls into their arms. But a few minutes later, they've stopped working, and they've got their energy back, and then they can start to sort of get a bit of energy, and then they hug the next person that sort of has arrived zombie-like to the top. And I can't, in a strange way, everyone's going to think I'm a massive alcoholic, so I keep on using analogies about drinking, but it's a bit like having a really good night out, in that you're aware of what's going on the summit, sort of vaguely aware, and it's sort of this weird sort of flashes of experience and sights and smells and sounds and everything, and then you wake up the next morning and you're like, what the hell went on? And it's almost not until you start talking to other people about it or looking at pictures that you start to connect the dots.
Wow.
Because you're in this drunken stupor, this trance, this whatever. And then you suddenly realize, that's cool if you came down safely, but but how that can affect people in terms of making the right decisions when they do come down, and why, goodness, when people have a couple of beverages, they do things which are out of character and they
Of
wouldn't normally do.
course. And we've all done it.
We've all done it.
How long are you allowed to spend? What's the recommended time you're allowed to spend at the summit? Or does it depend on your
Yeah,
comeback window?
it depends on how you're feeling. I mean, if you're, if it's late in the day, you don't want to hang around. It depends on how much oxygen you've got with you. There's a little bit of a sense of, you get there, frankly, you take your photos, you have a hug with the person next to you, you catch your breath. There's nothing else to do. If you've got a sat phone, maybe you'd call home, but it's not like you're sort of up there to you've seen the view.
Yeah, of course.
You've done what you need to do. And actually in the back of your mind, you're just thinking, I just want to get the hell out of here.
Is it true? Is it true that the most dangers on the way back down, the most deaths are on the way back down, the most accidents on the way back down?
Yeah, I mean, I can't quite remember the specific statistics on this, but I think I certainly would believe and wouldn't be surprised if you looked at all the accidents, they happen to people on the, certainly accidents that happen sort of properly on the mountain. Yeah, so it's not a heart attack in base camp, but it's often people on the way back down. Wow. And certainly to the famous things like the deaths. So let's take 1996, the Everest disaster there, because many people might have read Into Thin Air or seen the film Everest. If you haven't seen the film Everest, I would absolutely recommend it. I rewatched it recently with some friends, and at the end of it, they all looked at me and went, "You are mad. We've obviously heard you talk about it loads of times, but it's not until you sort of see it, even in a Hollywood version of it, you sort of think, wow." And I would absolutely say that's very similar to the experience. That's what it sort of is like. I don't think they took too many liberties with either the story or what they're trying to demonstrate in the film. So, do see it if you want to try and get a little bit of a taste of what it's like, especially if things go wrong. But a number of the people had got to the top and were dying on the way back down. So you had, Doug Hansen, who was the client, you had Rob Hall, you had the other assistant guide who died on the way back down. You had the Japanese climber, you had 3 Indians who were on the north side of the mountain who aren't told about in the Everest movie, but they died. I stepped over one of their bodies in 2005. Famously sort of referred to as green boots.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was one of the people who succumbed to the 96 Everest disaster.
Wow.
And it is, and obviously every circumstance is different, but often what happens is you are so spent, you're so exhausted, it may be late in the day, but especially if you start to split up, if you're not there with each other, if you're not sort of cajoling each other, if you're not working together, if you're not keeping an eye on each other, you sort of start stumbling down. It's the drunken walk home by yourself and you fall asleep in a hedge. Again, I'm sure we all know somebody who's done that. If you're with a few mates, you help each other back home.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very true.
Because suddenly that hedge looks so inviting to just, I'm just going to sit down and rest for a few minutes. The trouble is, up on the top of Everest, you sit down and you fall asleep. That's probably it.
You're staying there, yeah.
You're staying there.
And that happens quite a lot. I mean, I was reading through Wikipedia not long ago, and a lot of times people succumb to exposures because they sat down, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was and I guess that's a big, when it becomes super real in your head, where you have to keep going, and your inner voice has to be on your side. Your conscience, as you mentioned, has to be. You have to be your best coach in that situation. And
it's just a really good reminder of the importance of the team. That people often focus on the team getting you to the top, but actually, and again, the cliche is getting to the top is only half the journey. But actually, because so many of the deaths and the really dangerous bit is actually on the way back down. That's the more important part of the team.
Of course,
together.
Yeah, and I imagine when shit starts getting real for people start fearing for their lives, there's more of a chance for the team to start separating and not stay behind, because they're like, well, if I stay behind, I'm going to be in a bit of trouble. And see that in the movie. And I guess that's where it's important to create the connections and create the team bond and really drive each other together. And that's what not only makes successful climbers, but it keeps you alive and it allows you to climb another mountain. Were there any big incidences that you heard about on your trip?
So I mean, there were another. So I sort of talked about, and this actually comes back to the second half of one of the defining moments of Everest for me is. So I've just mentioned the green boots and stepping over green boots his feet, quite literally over his green boots. And that was the first body that I saw on Everest. Now on my summit day, I saw 8 bodies. Wow. Apparently, someone once told me that if I'd looked hard, I could have seen 22 bodies on that section of the climb. But between you and I wasn't exactly playing I Spy at that stage. But it was, so I had that sort of instant shock of seeing green boots, and that was, I can say it in this podcast, but that was a fuck moment.
Of course.
And sort of having to sort of regather my thoughts and think, okay, right, this has happened. I knew I was going to see this guy, so I can't be surprised by it. Keep going, keep your wits about you. Use this as the great example of what not to do, but also what happened to this guy. Why did it happen? He got caught out by the weather, but also the team sort of split up and fragmented. So stick together, stick with the team all the way to the top, and then as far back down as possible. Work together, look after each other. And then what felt like a few minutes later, I can't quite remember how long later, I then came across the body of a guy called Marco, who died about 10 days earlier. Now, I knew Marco. He'd actually climbed with it. He was a Slovenian climber. He was climbing with a climbing partner of mine on another team, a guy who I'd climbed in Alaska with. And I'd spent time in base camp with Marco, charming guy. I didn't know him that well, but got to know him on the mountain, this networking in base camp. And, it was very, very, extremely sad and tragic when we heard he died. And then coming across his body, a few days later, and sort of stepping over it. And again, because that was he was literally staring me in the face, whereas Green Boots was covered in snow and was just a pair of boots sticking out of a snowdrift. That sort of really brought it home. And that personalized it. This wasn't some historical signpost. Not that one should talk of a person like that, but this is somebody I knew who only a week, 10 days earlier had been a living, breathing human being. And it just sort of reminded you of your own sort of sense of
morality,
mortality, exactly. And again, stick together all the way to the top and all the way back down. And I've seen so many people who on the way back down have just sort of started going down by themselves. And and I'd certainly say I've been guilty of it in certain circumstances as well. But you don't do that until you feel as though you are in a safer environment.
So you made it, you done it, you crushed it, you created an amazing experience for yourself, an amazing achievement, some incredible stories, and you were 21 years old. And for a lot of people, Everest is the end. Everest is the one, it's the big goal. But then we go from Nepal to Pakistan and K2. And, K2 is almost like, I don't know, from my perspective, it's like the ugly sister of the mountains. It's spoke about less, it's glorified much less. People don't make big Hollywood movies about K2. And if they do, I've never seen one. But it's a lot harder, isn't it? It's a much more dangerous climb. It takes a lot more lives, 1 in 4, more like 1 in 5 now. Things are getting a bit better. People are just becoming better at climbing. We have better technology. We have better weather reporting, as you mentioned. How many years after you hit Everest did you sort of begin thinking about K2 and start putting that in motion?
So I thought about it within about an hour of leaving the summit of Everest. So literally on my way down from the top of Everest, because I think, as you say, for many people, Everest would be a lifelong ambition, and of course it had been my life's ambition at that stage, as part of the 7 summits. But it's a sort of strange thing, about achieving an ambition, is that you sort of feel as though it's going to be the end, and it's going to give you all the answers, and it's going to complete you and make you something. And actually, you get there and you're like, well, either it hasn't changed anything, it's just another thing you've done, or it leaves you hungry for more. And as you reach up to that, what you thought was that top rung on the ladder, and you sort of pull up onto it, of course, more rungs appear out of the ether sort of mysteriously. And so on the way back down, I was instantly thinking to myself, well, I guess I've done that. I probably should have been focusing on getting back down safely, but I've done that. What the hell do I do next? I can't go any higher than that. How do I divide it? And I think even then I was already, aware, in sort of the early mid 2000s, that Everest was starting to get a bit of a reputation of, oh, well, if you're just a rich Western tourist, you pay your money, someone carries you to the top, and it's not like it used to be. It's nothing special. And I think that that probably has only got more exacerbated since then. You know, the challenge hasn't really changed much. The mountain hasn't got any easier, hasn't got any shorter, etc. But I was conscious that because I identified my identity was that of a mountaineer, how do I demonstrate that you know I can do some interesting things, you know, that I have some skills that I can put to practice in the mountains, and you know, the obvious answer to that was K2. Now, of course, there'd be many other mountains I could have answered that with, but for me it was K2. You know, with the history of it and what it represented. Chris Bonington, so probably one of the most famous British climbers of all time, he referred to K2 as being the gold medal of mountaineering. And you know, now I don't quite know what that makes Everest, but maybe that just makes Everest the getting to the Olympics.
Yes,
whereas K2 is the gold medal. You know, getting to the Olympics, representing your country, epic. But gold medals, you know, why wouldn't someone want to go for that? So instantly we're starting to think of it, and tried to do it thought about it in 2007, didn't quite manage to get it going. 2008 managed to get some sponsorship together, and then at the last minute our sponsor pulled out. It's a very different story, and I didn't go. And for anyone who knows anything about K2, there was a big disaster on K2 in 2008, so to rival that of Everest in 96. So I was watching almost live as I was seeing these reports coming in, thinking, I should be there, I should be with these guys. And then suddenly going, shit, I'm really glad I'm not there with these guys, or what would happen if I was there, as 11 people died in the space of about 36 hours. And then in 2009, I managed to get my first trip to K2, and, you know, and that was really, really exciting. And I thought, this is it. This is going into the big league of you know, this is not a place for tourists. You know, this is a mountaineer's playground.
And I guess you were one of the guys taken on K2 who had summited Everest. And I don't imagine everybody there's done Everest at that point.
Quite a high proportion.
Really interesting.
To be perfectly honest. But yeah, I mean, not everybody, but I don't know what is a statistic, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 60%,
okay.
70%. Yeah, pretty high percentage. So I think people having a similar idea to me. So, you know, those who summit Everest are probably split into numerous camps. You know, yes, you've got the guides who are doing it because it's their job and they'll go where the work takes them. You've got those who it really is their life's ambition. You're not saying that they're not mountaineers, but once they've done it, that's it. You've got those who go and they might have had loftier ambitions, but because of the experience, they go, never again. And then you've got those who go, I loved it, what next? And probably that final category is what sort of starts to create the pipeline of people who are interested in K2.
Of course. I mean, and of course, it's a very famous mountain as well. And that drives people, just the danger of it. You know, there's a huge element of people wanting to overcome some of the world's biggest challenges. Why is K2 harder than Everest? What makes it tougher?
So if you were to sort of play top trumps with Everest and K2, and it's probably quite a good analogy, it's gonna beat Everest on pretty much everything, other than arguably cost. Although they're actually probably not that far off in terms of what you can spend. That's not necessarily to say that it is it's the highest in the pack. There couldn't be other top trumps that could beat some of K2's. So let's take some examples. So yeah, it's obviously not the highest mountain in the world. All right, it's not the steepest mountain in the world. It's not the most remote. It doesn't have the worst weather. You know, technically it's not, you know, the most difficult, you know, it doesn't have the worst death rates, but it's so high up in all of those measurements that sort of on aggregation, that's the card you want. I remember playing Marvel top trumps, you know, when I was at school, and I think it was Galactica, you know, that was the card you wanted because it was so high up in all of those things. You know, it wasn't that he couldn't be beaten, but that was your top trump that you wanted. And to use an example of the sort of the experience on the mountain itself. So Everest, I was wearing trainers to about 6,700 meters. So I didn't put on a pair of proper boots and crampons to 6,700 meters. On K2, the second you get to the foot of the mountain, it averages 45 degrees all the way to the top. And there are some slightly flatter sections, which of course therefore makes some slightly steeper sections. And therefore, the second you set foot on it, crampons, ice axes, harnesses, helmets, that's from just over 5,000 meters. So
Mm.
you've got 3,600 meters of vertical climbing, not vertical, but of climbing, of ascent, of actual climbing. To put that into context, that's 4.4 times the height of the Burj Khalifa. So the highest building in the world.
Wow.
Imagine four and a half of those on top of each
Mm.
other. It's something like 78 Nelson's columns. It's 800 London buses, because that's how we
Wow.
measure things in the UK,
Of
isn't it?
course.
And so it is big, it is steep, it does not let up. On Everest, there were loads of sections where I would have quite happily climbed without a rope. There was no need for a rope. The rope was just basically showing which way you're going. You were bimbling along. With K2, once you're on there, you're invested and you're going for it. The other thing about K2 is because it's so steep, it is constantly affected by avalanche and rockfall. So on Everest, yes, it gets big avalanches. It can have some rockfall, especially sort of around the sort of the Khumbu icefall. But you might get sort of a few of those a season. K2, you're getting those every hour.
Wow.
It is constant. It'd be a bit like standing with the pins at the end of the bowling alley and with a whole load of people randomly throwing balls at you. So A, you want to keep a helmet on, and B, you want to keep your wits about you. So you're constantly looking up about what's about to happen. And so coming back to that idea of communication with each other, if you dislodge a rock, you're immediately shouting rock or below or something like that, because there might be someone below you who then gets hit by it. I've seen people having, broken arms from rocks hitting them. I was in a tent with my partner, sort of sitting facing each other, sort of sitting up, sort of kid out, and a stone, probably about, this big, not very big, came like a missile straight through the tent between us.
Wow.
And all we heard was a like a whirling sound, and then a pew, and it was like something out of Deep Impact. When you see a bolt going through a spacecraft, and you're sort of thinking, right, firstly helmets on, secondly we need to move this tent.
Yes.
And many of the campsites, you can only fit a few tents in them, so you're lucky if you can have enough horizontal flat space underneath the tent for the actual tent to fit on. Quite often half a section of the tent is hanging off the side, and so you're roped on. Sometimes you might even be sleeping with a harness on and roped in, and it's a whole different ball game. It's epic.
Wow. And how long did it take? Is it a quicker climb than Everest?
It can be. Like with any of these mountains, it depends on how well you're acclimatized and what the weather is like. So Everest, when I did it, took me 64 days from leaving the UK to get to the top of the mountain. That was really slow. Not because I was climbing slow, just because the weather that year was really bad. It was, we were 20 days longer, 3 weeks longer than most people would be looking to climb it. K2, my first 2 attempts, we turned back. The whole trip was nearly 2 months long. 2018, when I finally got to the top of the mountain, it's the third time lucky, I summited on day 37, I think, and was back home on day 45. So it was a relatively quick trip.
Wow. And so, 2018, a couple of years ago, you smashed K2. That was that your last towards the 7 summits? Was that when you completed everything?
So K2 wasn't one of the So Everest was the last of my 7 summits. So completed the 7 summits when I was 21 and became the youngest Briton to do that, taking the record from a young Edward Grills. I think he's known as Bear to his friends. I don't know what he went on and did. Sorry, he actually sent me a really sweet postcard afterwards.
Really? That's
nice.
He
sent me a sweet postcard. He said to Jake Meyer, the conqueror of Everest, I hear that you're a very worthy person to have taken my crown. Congratulations. Love to meet up with a beer, but you're buying. Which I thought fair enough. And Bear, Bear's been fab throughout my career, and we've done loads of bits and pieces together. He's a very inspirational guy. But I completed it, and I became the youngest man in the world to complete 7 summits. Now, I say man because semantics in records are important. I was beaten by a young lady by less than 24 hours in American. But frankly, when you're standing with the world at your feet, the semantics of your record
of course,
really don't matter. And then so then it was K2, and in some ways like a secondary challenge, which is really fascinating, which I'm gently working my way through, is the second 7 summits. Because almost without exception, the second highest mountain on every continent is harder than the highest. So in Africa, Mount Kenya, to climb to the proper peak, is a rock climb. It's much, much more technically difficult than Kilimanjaro. In South America, Oyos de Salado is higher. Is a little bit a little bit lower, but has a technical bit of rock right at the top of it. K2, obviously harder than Everest. And I'm trying to think how many people have done the 7 summits. I think we're probably talking about 600-700 people. I think certainly fewer than 1,000 people have done the 7 summits. But I would say fewer than 100. Probably fewer than 50 have done the second 7 summits. So that's a little gentle thing sort of happening in the background.
How much, something I'm interested in, because it varies quite a lot. How much realistically does it or should it or will it cost to climb Mount Everest and K2?
Okay, so some caveats here. So the first one in terms of a working assumption for my calculations is just for this mountain. So somebody asked me this in Cora the other day. They sort of said, if I haven't done any climbing, what might it cost me to get to the point where I could make a concerted effort on K2? And I sort of worked this through because I thought it was quite an interesting thing. And I said probably looking at around $250,000. Something in those range, you know, to sort of take you from, I've never climbed before, so Jack, you want to do it, never done anything before, you know, to build up over the course of maybe about 5-6 years of building up to that. And that would probably include, I mean, a lot of sort of skills, experience, and you know, probably doing the 7 summits, probably doing another 8,000 meter peak, then doing Everest, and then going on to K2. Now, that doesn't necessarily say that you'll get to the top of K2, but you know, that's probably not too far off. So if you wanted to sort of segment a chunk of change to go and do it, you might be looking at that. I appreciate, you know, you don't understand how I've calculated that. So for Everest itself, cheapest rate you could probably get, you're looking at about the $25,000 -
Wow.
something like that. You might be able to get some that are a little bit cheaper, so closer to 20. But that's probably about it. Now, of that, at least 50% of that is going to be just your permit. Now, this is the best analogy is a bit like flying with Ryanair. Okay, so that call it $25,000. Yeah, that gets you a seat on the plane. Okay, so that gets you your permit, and it gets you a seat on the plane. However, anything else you want? Do you want any carry-on luggage? Do you want to use the loo? You want a sandwich? Do you want speedy boarding? You know, that all adds on. So that $25,000, that probably doesn't include oxygen, or if it does, it's only 1 bottle. It is probably, you know, several clients to 1 Sherpa. It's probably no, you know, official guide. It may not be any support of a base camp. You know, it is the no frills setup. Now, the other end of the spectrum, I think people probably have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you know, there are a number of people who are offering the VVIP sort of version, which you're looking at about $120,000. Okay, $120,000. And that gets you helicopters in and out. Now, you still need to acclimatize, but you might acclimatize on a different mountain. But it means that when you're in base camp, and if you're not doing anything for a few days, you can get a helicopter back to Kathmandu and chill out. Wow. And then fly back up there. You know, you could probably hop up to Camp 2 as well, so you're not having to climb through the Khumbu Icefall. It is as much oxygen as you can drink. It is 2 or 3 personal Sherpas. You've probably got another formal guide, someone with a professional guiding qualification. Now, whether or not they're a Nepalese guide or a Western guide or from anywhere else in the world, doesn't matter, but they have a recognized guiding qualification. You know, it is steak in base camp. It is widescreen TVs. It's the full, you know, this is first class Emirates, you know, private jet sort of thing. You know, this is epic. Now, you know, we've got our 2 ends of the spectrum there, and you know, and most of us, well, if we're doing a long haul, we probably don't want to fly Ryanair, and we can't afford to go private jet, so we go for our BA, you know, our Virgin Atlantic, something in the middle. So there you're looking at your between $40,000 and $60,000. And that is probably a more realistic amount that people might be spending on it. And that gets, personal climbing Sherpa, a decent amount of oxygen, probably one guide for 2 or 3 people. You're still having to walk backwards and forwards. You could probably tag on a helicopter flight if you really wanted one. But that's kind of thing. Now, this is a really interesting question, because it then comes back to the sort of separate potential question about, but we look back to last year and all those people died, and why is it happening? And they're paying so much money and then they're dying. The whole almost economics of climbing Everest is the wrong way round, in that often those who have the most experience, this isn't completely true, but often those who, I'm going to say the other way around, those who have the least experience also have the least money, so they do the no frills version. Which means when they get into trouble, they're fucked.
Yeah.
That's you're up in the flight, and somebody, the stewardess comes over and says, "Oh, by the way, you didn't actually pay to have a pilot, and the autopilot has run out of battery.
Wow.
So you now need to fly that. You need to land the plane yourself." That is that kind of analogy, and I don't think I'm stretching it too much by saying
that makes complete sense.
And then you want the people with the least experience should be the ones paying the most money. I know they can't afford it, but should be to get the most support. It's the people who have the most experience who could get away with doing the low cost, no frills ones, because they've got that experience, and because if something goes wrong, they can deal with it. They can sort it, broadly speaking. And that's why this would be slightly careful from a cultural point of view here, but that's why you often see a lot of Indian deaths on the mountain. Now, I do a lot of work in India. I have huge respect, but Everest is seen as a very popular mountain, especially for Indians to climb. But often they don't have huge budgets to do it, so they will often do. And I gross generalization here, but as an example, so they will often go for the lower end, cheaper providers. They don't have the experience or less experience, and therefore if something goes wrong, they're in real trouble. And the other thing is often when you're paying for a guide, you're not just paying for them to take you to the top of the mountain. You're paying for them, or a leader, you're paying for them to tell you when to go back down as well.
Yeah.
You're actually paying for them to keep you alive.
Yeah.
And that might be a difficult choice they have to make, of saying, turn around, you're not going any further.
Well, I mean, also you're paying for them to risk their lives for you too, and that's a huge element of it. So some of these Sherpas are badasses. How on earth? Because they just fly up and down, no oxygen. Is that just because they're born into it? They are acclimatized by birthright? Is that what's happening there?
So there's an element of that. So again, for loads of people will know lots about this, but some people may not. But so Sherpa is sort of is an ethnicity almost. It's not a job description. So you can have non-Sherpas who are supporting expeditions. Okay, you can have non-Sherpas from Nepal who are supporting. In fact, of the 2 Sherpas in inverted commas that I climbed Everest with, one was a Sherpa from the Khumbu region, the other was from a different part of Nepal. He looked completely different, and he was great, and he'd actually won the Everest Marathon, which is kind of crazy, but doing a marathon at an average of like 4,000 meters.
Wow.
But yeah, so you've got these people who sort of through loads of generations have naturally been living higher up, so above 2,500 to 3,000 meters in the mountains. So it's not like they're living at 8,000 meters, but they're living in those villages. So their physiology has adapted to the environment they're in. But then you also just come to the pure sense of almost like the job description element of it, of what you're doing. So many of these Sherpas were, again, I'm using the term Sherpa for people on the mountain,
of course,
rather than the ethnic designation. But many of them will have started off as porters, or helping out, maybe helping out in the mess tents, in the kitchens, supporting expeditions, not going onto the mountain, sometimes as boys or, as teenagers. And then they'll sort of slowly build up some of those experiences. Nowadays, there are loads of climbing schools in Nepal, whether or not financed independently or financed, from around the world. So you've got a lot of Nepalese and Sherpa professional guides, which is amazing, which is so cool. It's just, taking control of it. So it's not just, oh yes, the Western, the American, the Brit, the Canadian will come in and they will make all the decisions. But that's really cool that they've got that self-sufficiency in that industry. And then they will build up their skills. So to be a good Sherpa on the mountain, you need to be fit. You probably come from a relatively good starting point. It's your Usain Bolt, just because of the size and the scale of him, and his certain physiological and genetic things of nature, it puts him in the right place. But if he doesn't train, if he, etc., he's not going to win his races, or he wouldn't win his races. So these guys are staying fit. They're doing all those things, and they are epic. They're amazing.
I wonder if that piece, that genetic, physical aspect of having that head start, lucking out in terms of genetics and DNA. I wonder if there's a similar thing that happens with mindset and the mentality of people, where people just have a basic strong ass mind where they can just put their mind on things and they don't have much unconditional doubt. It's just business for them. I wonder if that's a thing. I'd like to look into that, because there are definitely a lot of people out there that need help and support in terms of being motivated. Like, I'm one of them, man. I am lazy as fuck, and it's something I'm working on for sure. And there are people out there that really struggle with it, and there are people out there that just, they have so much get up and go. It's crazy. Where do you sit on that spectrum?
Much more at your end of the scale, my friend.
Yeah, laziness unite. What's up?
absolutely. And I'm a proper lazy bastard. And actually, really, if there's one thing that lockdown has done well for me, or the benefit that's come out of coronavirus for me, is that it's forced me into a routine, because I'm not constantly traveling, where to actually do some fizz. And because beforehand I never did any fizz. I just didn't do it. I didn't go for runs. I didn't go to the gym, anything. I went out for a run this morning, and I'm not setting any records or anything, but I'm doing at least 3 times a week, and it's great, and I'm really enjoying it. But I think I'd always given myself an excuse not to do it. Whether or not that's, I can't because I haven't got, I'm traveling, I haven't got my kit with me, or I'm traveling and the time zones don't work, or even just my bed is a bit too comfortable, or the sofa is a bit too comfortable, or the children, I'll go and do something with the children.
Yeah.
If I go to the gym, then it's an hour that I'm not spending with the kids, and
of course
that makes me a bad parent. So like anything in life, I think we will be motivated about the things we're interested in, the things that we want to do. So the fact that you are doing this, the fact that you've created this podcast series, this is amazing. This is so cool. And it might be something that you've been thinking about for years, but 12 episodes ago or 13 episodes ago, whatever we're on, you went, well, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, exactly what happened.
And you've got sometimes it is as simple as, I'm going to buy the kit, so I can see a cool stand there, and you've got some professional mics and things. And I'm going to commit to it. But it's the same with anything in life. The start of lockdown, the first thing I did was I went and got a proper pair of running shoes. I've never had a proper pair of running shoes. Maybe that's part of the excuse. So this shiny pair of running shoes is sitting there. I then make a statement to my wife, I'm going to do some running. So I've now committed to somebody else. I know that, if I don't do it, she's going to go, oh, another thing you're not doing. Play another tune, Jake.
My wife has seen me start so much shit I haven't finished.
And so you can take this. So it's having a bit of skin in the game. It's making it a little bit of a public declaration. Now, whether or not that's to one other person or it's to the world, it can be, it's you having your channel and saying, this is the series, and we're gonna keep running, without end until whatever, and that's really cool. And something like running a marathon is a really good example. If you look at the people who aren't runners, who don't run because they enjoy it, do it for several reasons. They might do it for a charity reason, because they want to do something good to raise money for a cause that's really close to their heart. Admirable. And if that raises money and encourages you to do something really amazing, that's a double win, isn't it? You'll get the other people who'll do it because they feel it's something that they should have done. So I think that the most popular ages statistically for people running their first and probably last marathon is 29, 39, and 49. It's people wanting to, I must run a marathon whilst I'm still in my 20s, because if I tick over into my 30s, I will lose the ability to put one foot in front of the other. It's illogical, but it's people setting themselves these little challenges. And I did exactly the same. When I turned 30, I set myself 30 challenges of things that I hadn't done and I wanted to do. And so make a public declaration, put some skin in the game, you know, buy something, spend a little money, book the ticket for the marathon, book a ticket, you know, book the time off work to travel. So I know at the moment that's a little bit more tricky, but you know, I've always wanted to go to Machu Picchu. You know, for 20 years I've been saying it. Well, book 2 weeks or 3 weeks now in the time of the year which is appropriate for going to Machu Picchu, and just book the time. You don't have to book the tickets, but book the time off. Take a single step. Again, it's cheesy, but every day
set things in motion. Yeah,
exactly. And you know, and hopefully once that ball starts rolling, destiny.
I'm gonna make it happen. I have this thing where I have to climb Kilimanjaro. I had actually sponsorship to do it, and it was on like 2 or 3 days notice or something crazy like that. And I got as far as my connecting flight in Amsterdam, and I had to land in the toilet because I had wild shits. It was so bad. And I had a friend meeting me from Canada and we didn't meet on the connecting flight. It was horrible. They wouldn't let me board on the next one because obviously the word got out. I had to land in the toilet, which is never good news. And my mate had to go and then climb on his own. So that was a bit of a stitch up. So, you know, I want to build myself up to doing that. It's always been in the back of my head. Damn, that was a sucky few days. It all happened so quick as well because it wasn't planned. And, you know, now I got time to think about it. My brother, we're going to go do Snowdon. And we're going to build ourselves up to it. We're going to make it happen. So maybe here's my public declaration to one of the most badass young climbers in the UK. I am going to climb Kilimanjaro in the next few years.
Heard it here first, everybody. We're all going to be, we want a podcast from Kilimanjaro.
Yeah, that can happen nowadays. Really cool. There's probably going to be 5G up there, you know?
Yeah. And more to the point, you know, like I said, that you know, any base camp is this wonderful melting pot of different cultures and different experiences, and like EastEnders on crack. And sometimes that's a metaphor, and sometimes that's not even a metaphor. But yeah, you would have the most incredible time. I could definitely see a mini series of the Kili podcast.
Yeah, well, definitely, I'd vlog it. We'd make it a thing, you know, and you know, maybe I can call you and ask you for some advice and some inspiration. I mean, look, you're clearly incredible at speaking, and I'm really passionate about people getting information from real sources of experienced and qualified people. You know, we live in this crazy fictional world, as I mentioned earlier, where people are having their worldviews constructed by lots of fictional and reality TV. So I'm really glad, you know, you're on the speaking circuit and you're on stage and you're educating and teaching people how to, you know, achieve cool stuff, and you've got some amazing advice. So, you know, keep doing it. I'm really grateful for you coming on this podcast today. But what's next for Jake Meyer? You know, once you do all these crazy things at such a young age, I mean, does it not feel like there's an aspect of, man, I wish I could just do it all again, forget I did it, and then just do it again? Or are you done? Are you hanging up your crampons and you're like, yeah, I'm a family man now?
As much so we were chatting before we started recording, and I know that you are a new father, 6 months in. So well done, and you're looking remarkably good for it. So things are obviously going well.
I got Natalia's incredible, man. She makes it so easy for me. It's ridiculous.
Well, if I've got bags under my eyes, it's because I've got number 3, who is 5 days old. So we're back to square one. But no, I mean, for me, it's a number of things. I mean, I have so many, like everybody, you know, we all have so many different strands to our life. You know, whilst my identity is climbing mountaineering, that's who I feel I am. Of course, it's not the sole way I define myself. You know, I'm a husband, I'm a father, so I've got loads of responsibilities. You know, I want to be as inspirational, as supportive, as guiding, as whatever to my 3 girls. You know, they don't have to climb. It'd be awesome if they did, but they don't have to. I just want to encourage them in whatever they do. I've got my day job. So I work for a management consultancy doing some leadership development, which I love. I thoroughly enjoy that. I get to meet fascinating people all over the world, and help them, and and help develop them, help them be better versions of themselves, and bring the best version of themselves to work every single day, or potentially into their lives. I've got the military side of my life as well, so I'm still a serving Army reservist officer, which again I love that. So there are. In fact, I had an interview yesterday for a new Army job, which fingers crossed, which would be really, really cool and open up new opportunities and new avenues and new doors. But as I say, at the core of my heart is the climbing. And so this summer, I was supposed to be doing a great big trip around Europe, climbing or trying to climb the highest point in every country in Europe, climbing the 50 mountains in 50 countries. And the aim was to do it in 50 days to set an epic world record, but have an epic adventure whilst doing it. It may not have ended up being 50 days. It might have been a few more, but ultimately it was about having the adventure. That, for very obvious reasons, hasn't happened, but we are aiming to do it next summer. The sponsors are all still committed, which is fabulous in this day. This day. So that's the sort of the nearer goal from an mountaineering point of view. I definitely hope to do something this year before the end of the year, mainly because I've got quite a lot of holiday to use. And I think my wife recognizes that I haven't been able to scratch the climbing itch, even though I need to change some nappies. But I don't know where that will be. And actually at the moment, we've got to be slightly careful about where you book, because who knows what's on the list and off the list.
Yeah, exactly. It's changing all the time.
Yeah. What was it? 2 Christmases ago, with 2 days notice, I had a week off. 2 days notice, I was like, well, I could go to Uganda, I could go to South Africa, I could go to Iran. I'm going to go to this, and I went to South Africa, and I went and climbed the highest point in 4 countries there, which is really cool. Making expensive buying a ticket at the last minute, but
yeah.
That was my own stupid fault. So hopefully something before the end of this year, and then going forwards, there are so many mountains, and that's the thing, as I've realized, is that you may focus on one mountain for a long period of your life, 10 years on K2, focusing on K2, but it's just one hill, and it's the same thing, with it's focusing on that big scary, promotion, or that exam, or that this thing that you're worried and anxious about. It will seem like the biggest thing at the moment, but you'll then get past it, and it'll just be another rung on the ladder.
Wicked. Well, Jake, you're a badass. I really appreciate you coming on. Go crush those 50 mountains. Stay alive. The world definitely needs people like you around. And maybe we'll do this again. I'll go smash Kilimanjaro, and we'll jump on a call.
Well, I will definitely tune in to listen to those vlogs. So,
Awesome.
Jack, thank you so much.
Cheers, man. You too. Appreciate you.
Take care, dude.
Ta-da, man.